Hey everyone, welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacasa, and the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast aims to bring the best stories and tips. Stories and tips from those that truly make an impact within the sport of fly fishing. I'll dig into the past, present, and future of our guests, uncovering their amazing story and journey. Join me each week as I interview a new guest from somewhere around the globe. If you're not yet a subscriber, help by subscribing now so I can attract the most influential guests and sponsors to the podcast. Let's make this the top fly fishing specific podcast available. Today's show is brought to you by the following sponsors. Angler's Coffee, a brand of coffee for anglers by anglers. Owner Joan Monahan grew up fly fishing, and after spending 40 years in the coffee industry perfecting blend and brew process, he retired to creating a coffee blend and brand for the sport of his passion. Go to www.anglerscoffee.com and pick up a bag of your choice. My personal favorite is the pre-ground caddis blend. It has a perfect balance of body, aroma, and acidity to kickstart my day. Thank you, Anglers Coffee, for supporting the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. We look forward to supporting you and your business. Again, www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupa Fish, that's D-U-P-E-A fish.com, www.dupafish.com. Coming soon, but head over now, pre-register, and make sure you are ready to receive all the notices of the great deals that we'll be having coming your way. With years of accumulated DIY, Todd and I have traveled and booked experience all over the globe. We know how hard it is to customize a trip to you and your group's particular needs. We will have a comprehensive list of service providers and guides to help you in selecting the perfect trip for your and your party's needs. Book a trip with us and have the adventure of a lifetime. That's Dupa Fish, www.dupafish.com. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. This is your host, Christian Bacasa, and today we have Colten Mclaren on the line. Colton, you're a guide out of Silverthorne, Colorado, Kirk's Fly Shop. Well, you live in Silverthorne, but you guide out of Grand Lakes.
Yeah, correct.
So quite a bit of ways there. How you doing this week, man?
Doing pretty good, man. Just tying up some flies.
Yeah, it's early morning. It's 5:30 here in Park City, Utah, 5:30 at your place. Whipping up some bugs bright and early. That's a good start to the day.
Yeah, definitely. It's fall time, so it's finally time for those guides to go fishing. So
that's right. Everybody,
just whipping up some streamers and trying to get some free fishing in.
That's right. And the fish are putting on the feed bag for winter, so everybody's healthy, and testosterone, hydrocortisone's all through the roof on everyone. So it's a good time of year. I like it.
Definitely.
So go ahead and tell me how you got into fly fishing, man.
So for me, fly fishing was always just an outdoor activity that my father and my grandfather on my mom's side both did. For my father, it was more of, hey, we have the fly rod while we're waiting for the bobber to go down and catch a couple fish, out of the lake or whatever. And it was kind of just some extra to, mess around with, just cast around some fly line. And for my grandfather, it was more of kind of a serious thing. He'd travel to places and go fly fish. And so I was always kind of around it. But for my dad, it was more of just kind of an extra thing. He was a big outdoorsman. Hunting, fishing was kind of his thing, elk hunting, deer hunting, waterfowl. And then I got really into fly fishing right after high school, and just really took off on it. I would say the biggest thing that got me into it was probably a trip I took with my grandfather, and we went to South Fork of the Snake River in Idaho, and it was probably, I'd say 11 or 12, and fished huge foam dry flies before like chubby Chernobyl was even a thing. It was just a hopper, and big, huge foam dry flies and mice, and it really just got me really addicted. I was like, man, I'm really good at this thing, and just kind of went from there, got into tying shortly after that, and been tying bugs for Man, almost like 8 years now.
Okay, right on. And you were with your grandfather. Do you remember what section you floated? Was it like the canyon section or?
I don't actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were. I just remember we were on the South Fork, Idaho, Snake River. We stayed at a really nice, like, super bougie lodge, and it was kind of a really fortunate experience.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Grandpa did it up right?
he did. Yeah, definitely.
What's your grandpa like, man?
My grandpa is. So he was an environmental engineer. He had a company called McLaren Heart. So he was a pretty busy guy, pretty involved in taking care of his company, and he was always really involved in spending time with me and my cousins. But he was really, really hard worker, definitely a workaholic. So a little bit anal, but that's all right.
Yeah. Hey, he's grandpa. He's the owner of business. Got to keep things in order. Keep you guys in line. I'm sure you were all over the river, running around like knuckleheads, not understanding some of the dangers and things, right?
Exactly.
What a fortunate experience. That's really cool. And so he took you out. How many days were you out there?
So we were out there for 2 days, and then we went to the Salt Flats and checked that out, and then I went back to Colorado.
That's a stark difference. You go from there to the Salt Flats.
Yeah, so for me, he had to drive me out from Colorado. So he flew into Denver, picked me up, drove me out there, met up with my cousins and my uncle. And so on the way out and on the way back, we actually visited the Salt Flats.
That is cool. When you were on the river, were there some specific moments or fish that you can recall? Tell us a little bit more detail about where it's just, wow, this was something that set me off.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I was struggling pretty hard, actually. We were fishing out of a drift boat, and, first time fishing out of a drift boat for me. And honestly, probably third or fourth time fly fishing altogether in my life at that point. So, like I said, when I was out with my dad in Colorado, we'd be fishing a lake or fishing a river with spin gear, conventional gear, and then the fly rod would come out when we were kind of bored and just kind of practice. And then if we caught a fish on the fly rod, it was like, we weren't planning on catching many fish, but if we did, it was a big thing. So for me, I was struggling pretty hard on the boat the second day, and the whole first day I hadn't caught a fish. And the biggest moment I definitely remember was, the guide at the time said, no, you need to set the hook by pulling the entire rod up. And then once I got that by lifting my hand all the way up in the air, then the next take I got, it was fish on. And it was probably like a solid 17, 18 inch rainbow. And, a wild 17, 18 inch rainbow in the Snake River is a pretty tough fighting fish, especially for like an 11-year-old. I remember specifically the rod immediately after the setting the hook going straight down to the edge of the boat, and the guide saying, "Don't break the rod." And the standard, Western trout guide experience, he's like, no, don't break the rod.
That's awesome.
But so I really remember that fish vividly because it was the first fish I caught, and it was an amazing place, which, it's crazy that it took me that long. But as we all know, you can put people on the fish, but landing them is a different story.
That's right. And what a cool thing too, as a kid, it's different, right? You get that hook set, it starts running on you, the tip of that rod's bobbing all over the place, everybody's yelling at you and cheering, and man, it's gotta be a great memory for you.
Oh, definitely. Well, and back then, and even now, I think they have like I think Echo Fly Fishing makes a little kid's rod, but, there's not really any fly rods for kids. So every fly rod's too big for a kid when they're like, 8 to 12.
Yeah.
So it seems like the gear is always a little bit too big and too heavy, even if you're fishing with like a 5-weight or something. So, it was kind of funny trying to see me wrestle that rod, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think Sage makes one too that's a little more kid specific. They're a little shorter and still have the backbone, but soft in the tip kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so you come out of that scenario and then you head back home. Where does the fishing go from there? You got the bite, you got the tug is the drug, as they say, and the addiction started. And where from there?
Yeah, so I grew up in a place called Arvada, Colorado, which is it's like West Denver, essentially. So we weren't really close to a lot of trout streams, but they weren't too far away. We have the South Platte, that's Cheeseman Canyon and Decker's up there, which was only about 45 minutes an hour from Denver.
But you're 12 years old, so it's not like
right
there.
Exactly. So for me, fly fishing and I was still doing a ton of conventional fishing at the same time. So it would be, bring the spin rod and the fly rod. I would just jump on my bike and go fish warm water bass ponds. And, I ended up catching a lot of catfish and a lot of carp as well, but mostly targeting bass and small panfish down there in the warm water ponds of Denver. We do have some smaller streams down in the city that still hold trout, but nothing really huge. We have Boulder Creek over there in Boulder, which is pretty good. But yeah, it was mostly just bass and kind of cutting my teeth, catching a lot of bass and a lot of warm water species, and sneaking off on the bike or the skateboard and going catching a couple largemouth or smallmouth and then sneaking back home.
And were you like reading books and magazines, or how were you educating yourself to
actually it was all kind of just self-taught. It was probably pretty ugly to start off. But yeah, it was kind of just go out there and wing the thing around in the air and see if you can catch some fish.
Yeah, and it was working.
I fished a lot of woolly buggers. Didn't have any idea what a Nymph Rig was or like a dry dropper for, years, until I had met some friends in high school that wanted to go fly fish.
Okay, so that's a good gateway transition there. Let's hear about these friends in high school. Tell us a little bit about them and who they are, and then let's hear how. So
yeah, I had a few friends in high school that fished as well. Jimmy was one of them, and basically he had the same thing. Fly fishing was kind of just always something they did as an extra activity while they were out hunting or while they were out fishing. And then they'd pull out the fly rod, kind of the same as me and my dad. So me and Jimmy would go, and at that point, he had gotten his first car. So then we had this whole world opened up. We could jump in the car on the weekend, go fish the South Platte, or we'd sneak up to Wyoming and go fish the Miracle Mile section, which I had fished a lot up there as a kid with conventional tackle, and I always wanted to fly fish up there. So we'd go up there and chase some giants on the North Platte and on the Miracle Mile, and we did a lot on the South Platte to start out. That was the big one, as I'm sure a lot of people in Colorado, that's a really popular one. South Platte Dream Stream section, Charlie Myers, and then hiking into Cheeseman Canyon was really the big one. I did that for a while, started to go to college, made it about a year, and then I was kind of working with my dad's construction company, and I met a guy named Philip Chamberlain, who is essentially my best friend right now. Been my best friend for the past 5 years now, and we've guided together up in Wyoming. We guide together now at Kirk's Fly Shop in Grand Lake. Mm-hmm. So once I met him, it was kind of game on. We started fishing all over the place, and that was I'd say probably right at when I was about 21, met him, and we started fishing South Platte a lot, of course. Started fishing all over. Like, we made a couple crazy trips to the Taylor, fished the Colorado for a long time with him, and then I was getting ready to go to guide school. So I told him, hey, I'm going to Sweetwater Guide School. I've invested some money and I'm going to try and guide. And he was like, man, that's the coolest thing. So we were both working in somewhat the construction trade at the time. So I was doing I was a structural concrete carpenter, mm-hmm. and he was doing custom woodworking. And I told him, hey, I'm going to go be a fishing guide. I'm giving all this up. And he's like, no way. I've always wanted to do that. And so I told him about what I was doing. I was going to Sweetwater Travel Guide School out in Montana. And he was really jealous and thought that was super cool. And a couple months go by, fast forward, I came back from Sweetwater. I had a bunch of jobs lined up, jobs in Alaska to guide, jobs in Colorado here. And he had actually called me and said, "Hey, Colton, I got this offer to go guide at this ranch in Wyoming called Brush Creek Ranch. And I know that you've got a bunch of job offers, but do you want to take a gamble and go see what this ranch is about?" And I said, "Yeah, man, I definitely would want to guide with my best friend." So we both just packed up our vehicles, packed up our girlfriends, and went up to Saratoga, Wyoming. And
were they your actual girlfriends, or were these your fly rods?
These were our actual girlfriends. Yeah, we told them, "Hey, we're moving to Wyoming," and both of them were actually pretty ecstatic about it. So that worked out.
That's cool.
And they both got jobs at the ranch as well in different areas. So it was awesome. We guided up there at Brush Creek Ranch for our first season, guiding on the North Platte and its tributaries up there.
Very cool.
And then, I stayed up there for a year. Phil wanted to move back to Colorado. And so he came down. He started guiding for Kirk's Fly Shop out of Estes Park, actually. And then he moved over to the Grand Lake shop. And when I got done guiding up in Saratoga, I was headed back to Colorado for some reasons, for family reasons. Becca's mom was not doing too well, so we moved. My wife is Becca.
Yep.
Moved back down here to Colorado to take care of her, and then Phil hit me up. He said, "Hey, if you need a guide job, Kirk's is awesome. We've been doing really cool things over here." So I met Kirk himself, Kirk BN, and liked the camaraderie and liked what they had going over there. A little bit less of a cutthroat situation than most guide operations. Everybody at Kirk's, we share information for the most part, and it's really, really a cool thing over there. So
yeah,
I loved it immediately and started guiding, and that was 3 years ago now. So
that's cool. Yeah, Kirk's is pretty well known for their customer experience. I can imagine, that it's a shared environment between the guys. Like, hey, let's just make sure the customer's happy, right? Having a great time.
Right. And the last thing that any of us want at Kirk's is to go into the fly shop and feel like you can't approach somebody in the fly shop and ask for advice. We hate that elitist stigma that has been around fly fishing for a long time.
Yeah.
Also for females, I hate when I hear of a female going into a fly shop and be like, "Yeah, it was just a bunch of guys in there and they looked at me like, do you even fish?" That's a horrible thing. I think every customer, regardless of who you are, race, religion, sex, whatever, you should go into a fly shop and feel at home and feel wanted, and get the advice that you're there for.
Yeah, man, it's a beautiful perspective, and I think we're getting more and more of that these days, and it's fantastic to see. But great to have guys and shops like you really leading on that. So cool to hear.
Oh, it's awesome. I love it. It's really great. And as a kid, I had a couple experiences going into fly shops, and you get that kind of fratty mentality where they kind of just give you the cold shoulder.
Yeah.
That's what drove me to never give anybody that experience in the fly shop.
Yeah, that is cool.
And of course, I don't spend a whole lot of time in the shop, but when I am, I definitely want to give them all the advice they need to just go out there and catch fish. That's what we're here for.
That's good. I like it. Let's do this. Let's take a minute. We're going to hear from our sponsors when we get back. And have you tell some stories about your experience up in Bush Creek with your buddies, and let's hear a little bit about that. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. We'll be right back, everyone. Angler's Coffee. We love fueling your next cast. We've been roasting coffee before coffee was cool. www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupafish. Coming soon. Pre-register now and get notified. www.dupafish, that's DUPE, afish.com. All right, welcome back, everybody. We've got Colten Mclaren on the line. He's guiding out of Kirk's Fly Shop in Colorado. You've been telling us a little bit about how you got started with your grandpa, and then heading back home, fishing with some high school buddies, and of course, graduating into this friendship you have with Philip, and you guys head off to Bush Creek Ranch in Wyoming and start tearing it up, and really come home, have this relationship with Kirk's Fly Shop, and going from there. But before we left, I really wanted to hear a little bit about, one of the stories you had with Philip and your girlfriends up at the lodge. Tell us a little bit something there.
Yeah, so we were working up at a big private guest ranch called Brush Creek Ranch. So it was, funny thing. I got connected with the ranch through Philip, and he got the offer through Instagram, and him and his girlfriend Betha both got job offers up there through social media, and so we followed them up there, my wife and I, and we basically just kind of cut our teeth into guiding, Philip and I, and it was funny because we were actually put in the same trailer or house. Well, we were actually roommates as well, just by sheer happenstance. And so we would go guide, come home, tie flies all night, then go guide the next day. So it was a really cool experience being with your best friend, having him right there to bounce ideas off of. Hey, what was good today? What was good yesterday, and tying bugs. And we also got each other into plenty of trouble. We discovered this really cool spring creek one day on our days off. I'm not going to mention it just so I don't blow anything up there in the valley. Respectable. Really, really cool spring creek over there in Wyoming, where it's maybe 3 to 5 feet wide, little meadow setting, kind of plain setting, 3 to 5 feet wide, really small creek, but big brown trout, big rainbows, and there's actually a tiger trout in there as well. So it was kind of cool to discover that place. And we come back from fishing over there one day, and Betha, Phil's girlfriend, said, "Hey, where should I go fish tomorrow?" Me and Philip were both guiding. And we said, "Oh man, you should go over to the spring creek. We fished it today. It was so awesome. We were fishing huge dry flies. That's all we had to fish all day. Didn't even have to tie on a nymph. Caught tiger trout, rainbows, browns, like 18, 20 range out of this tiny creek." And she's like, "Oh man, this sounds awesome." And so we were like, okay, we showed her directions, told her where to go, set her all up with bugs. And, Saratoga, Wyoming is a pretty desolate place in itself. I think they have, maybe 1,600 people as the population. So it's mostly just big ranches, big expanse land, and so to get to a lot of these places, it's either right there near the North Platte, or it's 2-3 hours sometimes on some really, really desolate dirt roads, and not great dirt roads. Wyoming's got some pretty terrible roads. So we sent Beth on this wild goose chase, and Philip's girlfriend Betha, and she comes back. We see her that evening. It's like 8 p.m. We're starting to get worried, and we're like, "Hey, so how was the fishing?" She never even got there. Got 2 flat tires on the way, not just one. So she changed a flat, and then her other tire on driver's side got flat. So she had to limp back about 2 hours doing, God knows how slow on basically a rim. And she said it was horrible. You guys, where'd you send me? Did you want me to get kidnapped or something? So it didn't work out too great for Betha, but, Philip and I had a great time out there. And then, the previous weekend, we loaded up in my truck and we took Beth out there and got her that tiger trout.
Very cool. That is very cool.
Yeah.
What the experience, like lost in Wonderland, and
right.
Yeah.
And then, expectations too. You expect to go to this place and catch all these huge fish, and then, end up having a little bit of a journey instead.
Yeah, for sure. What's your Instagram handle so people can get a hold of you?
So my Instagram is Colten Mclaren Fly Fishing, and no spaces, no caps, just Colten Mclaren Fly Fishing.
Okay. And do you know Do you know Phillips too? Just plug him.
I do. Yeah. So Phillips is Fishy Phil 09. So that's Fishy with a P, Phil _ 09.
Okay.
And his girlfriend is actually really big in Instagram as well. Hers is Betha Went Fishing.
Yeah, I know those guys.
Yeah. They used to have a Colorado fly fishing couple as well.
Yeah. They, I met them early on, in my kind of Instagram ordeal.
Through Dupafish,
through
right?
Dupafish, yeah. They were going to go on a trip with us, and then Betha wasn't feeling too hot, so she couldn't go. And yeah, I haven't talked to them in a while, so it's cool. Small world, how things come together. I didn't even recognize.
Yeah, definitely. You actually, you know my buddy too, Scott from Lid Rig.
Oh yeah, Scott's a great guy. In fact, he's going to be out here visiting me here in a couple weeks. So yeah,
that's what he was saying. We were just fishing the other day, and he's like telling me he was going to go out and fish with you. I was kind of picking his brain.
Oh, very cool. Small world.
Yeah.
Lid rigs they're awesome little tools, man. I've been digging on mine. Let's see here. So you got this cool trip, you come back, but now your career's changed, man. You're a guide. You're a guide now in Colorado. Let's get technical. Let's talk a little bit about the fishing in and around the areas that you're guiding in or personally fishing in, and get technical on that. So why don't you describe where you're fishing, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the species and tactics you're using.
Definitely. So I guide primarily on the Colorado River, the upper Colorado. Do mostly float trips out of a raft or a drift boat from Pump House to State Bridge and all the sections in between that. So we have Pump House to Radium to Rancho, and then Rancho to State Bridge. So do a lot of float trips on the Colorado, guide some in Rocky Mountain National Park. I've done a few overnight backcountry trips to high alpine lakes and streams up there in Rocky Mountain National Park. Like I said, I guide for Kirk's Fly Shop out of Grand Lake. So we have all of Rocky Mountain National Park and most of the upper Colorado headwaters. We also do some wade fishing outside of Partial, Colorado. We have a little bit of private access there, which is really neat, right where the Williams Fork runs in. But my favorite place to be is in my drift boat or in my raft. You know, that's the best for me is float fishing, you know, throwing dry dropper or nymph rigs primarily. You know, we do some streamer fishing, but, you know, I like to streamer fish only with the more experienced anglers. You know, you have that big double articulated sex dungeon going past your head, and gets a little bit nerve wracking. So
yeah,
mostly dry dropper and nymph rigs on the Colorado, and you know, fishing like in the summer, chubby Chernobyl up top for a dry, or, you know, some caddis and stuff with, you know, Pat's rubber leg or a pheasant tail, that kind of stuff underneath it. When we're nymphing, we're normally doing like a triple nymph rig. My favorite triple nymph rigs like a Pat's rubber leg to either a Baetis or a midge larva. You know, so I'll do like a Pat's rubber leg to a Baetis to like an RS2 emerger on the bottom. Mm-hmm. Generally fishing about 4 to 5 feet with like a BB split shot or a number 4 split shot right up above that Pat's. But yeah, the triple nymph rig is the ticket on the Colorado most of the time. You know, we do a lot of dries as well. But you know, if it's ever slow, pull out the nymph rig and you can always pluck a couple.
Yep. Yeah. That's part of it, right? And catching fish too when you're guiding. It's not
exactly.
You know, people, that's what they think, right? And then hopefully you can transition to the learning experience in the day, et cetera, as you're out there. And
right. And that's kind of, you know, that's kind of what I like to do with my guiding style. I like to tailor the entire experience to each client. You know, you don't want to hire a guide and be stuck in this one style of fishing all day. And, you know, you're kind of like beating your head against the wall if you're not catching fish. And, you know, you ask the guide, hey, should we switch up? Should we switch up? And they say, no, this is what catches fish. Well, you know, there's always the time to just switch up and try something new. So
Yeah. And
I like to leave it open. I like to ask people, especially if they're experienced anglers, I like to say, hey, what do you guys want from the day today?
Yeah.
We can throw the Nymph Rig on and catch, 20, 30 fish. But do you guys want to work hard for like a couple dry fly eats, or do you want to work really hard for that one big streamer fish? I always like to kind of pick their brain and see what they want, because, they're the paying customer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or what do you want to learn today? What do you want to take home, kind of thing?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's another one. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of guides, I think, are getting better at that. And then there's certain areas where people are like, hey, I'm taking my kids out. I want them to catch fish. That's it. And you're like, okay, exactly. I get the scenario. Like, let's have them catch fish. But throughout the day, let's make sure they learn something so that they can, really have a great experience today. That's maybe a little more than that. There's a lot to learn from fishing. It's cool. So you're fishing those areas, and then what are some of your favorite areas that maybe you like to go? And you don't have to give any secret spots up or anything, but maybe just talk about those and why you like to target those areas.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm fortunate to live in Silverthorne, which we have Dillon Reservoir right here, which has the Blue River coming out of the bottom of the reservoir, right? Really famous tailwater. A lot of people know it as the Troutlets because we have the Silverthorne Outlet Mall that runs right next to the Blue River. So the Blue River essentially cuts through that outlet mall. And the upper section here right by the dam is known to have some really, really huge rainbow trout. There's some browns as well, but mostly rainbows. The reason they get so big is actually because we have these little shrimp called mysis. We have a couple tailwaters in Colorado, the Taylor and the Frying Pan being one of them. People probably know the Frying Pan for the toilet bowl. But so we have these mysis shrimp that get pushed out of the bottom of the dam, out of the reservoir, and essentially just millions of them being pushed out of the bottom of the dam. And so these fish kind of gorge on those mysis shrimp. They're these little tiny white shrimp. And, so, these fish get huge. It's just this constant protein source. And so it's not uncommon up here in the Dillon Reservoir section to catch, 27, 28-inch rainbows. I mean, there's been a couple 30s pulled out of here, I'm sure. And it's kind of a pretty cool little fishery. So being here in Silverthorne, if I'm doing something, I got to do the honey-do list or whatever for the morning. If I want to sneak out and get a couple casts, and I normally fish the Blue River here in Silverthorne, and, just go stick a big rainbow and call it good. And it's nice to be able to have that right next to the house. If I have a little bit more time, if I have like an entire day for fishing, I really like to go fish the Colorado where I guide. I love fishing the Colorado. Those freestone browns are awesome. But I'm always sneaking back up to Wyoming, always chasing those Wyoming trout, because there's something about when you cross the border into Wyoming, I'll tell you what.
Well, I think
those fish just fight.
Yeah, a lot of it too is it's just so barren up there, and like you said, it's these huge ranches where it's just empty forever, and you can kind of get lost, and you have that mystery of what's around the corner. Has anybody been here in a while?
Exactly, and that's what people don't really realize about up there. Is a lot of people think that most of Wyoming is all private, and you can't. There's not a lot of public access, but there's tons of public access fishing up in Wyoming. I know you had a friend of mine, Benjamin Crosher, on, and he lives up in Laramie, and he was talking about some public lands. I mean, that guy has shown me so many public access points on the North Platte. Yeah, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, he was a great guest.
Yeah, Ben's a good guy.
Yeah, good guy. Yeah, so he showed you a bunch of public waters, and you've been up there since? Sounds like a couple times.
Yeah, so I'm always, ever since guiding up there and up at Brush Creek and, meeting Ben, I definitely sneak up there as much as I can. It's about an hour and 45 minutes from here to get over to the border. You go through Walden, Colorado.
Okay.
But it's definitely worth it,
Yeah, and it's not too bad, right? I always look at it as like if you draw a 3-hour radius around you for fishing, if you got some pretty good areas to go to, man, you're in a good fishing spot. That seems like the right mix. 3 hours.
Definitely. Yeah. And you know what I'm finding out more and more as I fly fish all over, it's more about that journey, right? You know, with the pals and stuff, you know, it's more about getting to the spot and the struggles you go through and the experiences you have getting to those spots, and not so much just about the fish you catch when you get there. You know, that's what we all look back on, you know, as we look back, and yeah, we look back at the pictures of the fish we caught, but really, you know, what we're thinking about most is, hey, that crazy flat tire we got, or yeah, we had that crazy hitchhiker we picked up, or whatever, you know?
Right. Yeah. It's the experiences along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty fun. I feel the same way. I have a lot of fun with that. And I wonder for a lot of us if that's because that's kind of how we got into it, right? And it's like you had this adventure with your uncle or your dad or your mom or whatever it was. And, you know, that adventure is what really kind of kicked it off. And then you get the extra excitement of catching a couple fish, you know?
Right. I like to say that's the bonus.
Right. Yeah. It's the unknown, the icing on the cake, all those things, right?
Exactly.
Very cool. So you also fish quite a bit up in Estes Park?
A little bit. I don't free fish over there a ton, just because, you know, my proximity to Estes Park, it's pretty out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like to go hit those high alpine lakes and high alpine streams in Rocky Mountain National Park, whether it be on the west side of the park or the east side, which the east side's over there in Estes Park. But yeah, I spend a little bit of time over there. You know, we have the Big Thompson running through Estes Park, and a bunch of tributaries of the Big Thompson over there. So there's some really cool water, and, you know, going and chasing native greenback cutthroat is, you know, one of the coolest experiences you can have, you know. And of course, most of those streams, the lower you go in elevation, they're all chock full of brook trout as well. So, you know, even if I'm not in the park, you know, like Indian Peaks Wilderness area is a really good one over there, to chase cutthroat. And so, yeah, I'm always spending a little bit of time over there, I would say.
And there's a Kirk's Fly Shop over there too, right?
Correct. Yeah. So they've had a Kirk's Fly Shop in Estes Park. It's actually called Kirk's Fly Shop and Mountain Adventures, just because in the wintertime they do some snowshoeing. You know, we do a lot of guided hikes in Rocky Mountain National Park and backcountry hikes, as well as not just fishing trips. We also have a couple mountaineering guides. You can go climb Long's Peak and summit Long's Peak over there.
Okay.
So they've had Kirk's Fly Shop and Mountain Adventures over there in Estes for about 28 years now. So that was their first shop. And then they actually, in the last 4 years, just expanded over to the other side of the divide. And that's the shop I work for, is Grand Lake. So.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So part of the growth scenario. That's cool.
Exactly.
So what are some of the techniques that you're using for fishing these mysis shrimp? Tell us how you're using that pattern and how you're really getting into those.
Yeah.
fish.
So when I'm fishing the tailwater here in Silverthorne, I'm generally using at least one mysis on my rig. There's numerous different mysis patterns. I think Landon Meyer has one that he's kind of stapled as the Myers mysis. There's a couple other tires, you know, John Barr, I think, created one, and I think Pat Dorsey has one as well out. But there's numerous different mysis patterns. But the biggest difference is there's kind of a clear, like, epoxy tied mysis that has kind of like an epoxy UV resin body, and then there's more of like a marabou, you know, white marabou mysis, and those actually, I didn't know for the longest time, but those actually represent two different styles of mysis. So there's the dead mysis, which you fish, you know, miles and miles down outside of town. By the time that those mysis have reached that point, you know, most of them are dead. And then there's the live mysis, which are the marabou ones. And those you fish right up below the dam because they're fresh coming out of the dam, right? So I generally fish a triple nymph rig there as well. Triple or at least a double. Generally using a mysis as my point fly, and then midges or betases below that. So like a black beauty midge, or like a cream midge. I think there's one called the Miracle midge that I really like, or a Mercury midge as well. So I'm generally fishing a mysis up top as the point fly, kind of like an attractor, get their attention, and then 2 midges down below that, or a betas in the middle, and then a midge down below that. Sometimes I do like what's called a flossy worm, which is kind of like a squirmy, wormy spin-off, but a lot smaller style. Sometimes I do that in front, but most of the time they're on those mysis. So I'm really always have that mysis in the rig.
Right on. Yeah, that's there's a couple areas that I've heard of that I've never fished that pattern or had a chance to fish waters where they're prevalent. But yeah, it's pretty common ordeal to get some big fish out of that. I mean, like you said, it is that gravy train of protein just kind of flowing those fish. And it's for those of you guys that want to learn a little bit more about them. It's mysis, MYSIS shrimp. If you just look up mysis shrimp, you'll see all kinds of patterns and whatnot. Very cool.
And the really big mysis fishery that's famous for it is the frying pan coming out of Rudai Reservoir. Mm-hmm. Everybody at least that I know knows about the toilet bowl section up there, which is kind of, you don't need to go fish the toilet bowl. The frying pan, and actually, if you get to skip that in your fly fishing career, it's a really good choice for you. Just go ahead and skip that. There's no point in doing it. But what's really cool is the frying pan is a great fishery. There's actually a solid 5-6 miles of public water, I think, below the dam right there. Okay. So don't get distracted by the toilet bowl. If you're going to fish some mysis, go fish the actual frying pan. I promise it'll be worth it. Yeah. The Taylor as well, down a little bit further south, is another great mysis fishery.
And how are you fishing those? Are you fishing those with a nymph rig with the mysis, or are you fishing more of like a dry dropper scenario?
The same style nymph rig. The frying pan does fish a little bit better on dries than the Blue River and Silverthorn. Mm-hmm. But mostly just nymphing, especially with those mysis. I've never had luck really with a dry dropper with a mysis on it. Mm-hmm. Nor have I really tried it all that often, but every time I have, it just, you feel like you're going past the fish. Yeah. You're not quite getting down to them. Those tailwater fish are heavily pressured, and so they're pretty picky. Yep. So essentially you kind of have to bonk them on the nose with your flies, mostly in the Blue River, especially mostly sight fishing. So you're finding that big rainbow, you're targeting that rainbow, that specific fish, and kind of throwing your nymph rig time and time again, until you really get it right in their face, because these fish in the tailwaters, they're not moving 2, 3, 4 feet to eat something. I mean, they're just barely opening their mouth and closing it. They're not even moving. Yeah. So most of the time the nymph rig is the way to get down into their face, the quickest and have the most success.
And what type of water are you typically targeting? Is it the slower water right off the seams, or where are you targeting?
Yeah, mostly inside seams. You do fish some fast riffles, but mostly deep pools with inside seams coming off the current seam right there. And that's also where we can see fish easier, right? Is in those slower deep pools.
Yeah, the water's pretty clear, so you can.
Yeah, where the water's pretty clear and you don't have a lot of turbulence.
And then, are you specific on the type of indicators you're using? And
I like to use those. They're called cork cues. It's like CORQ. The little cork strike indicators. Normally in like a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 size. But to be 100% honest, I've had the most luck on the Blue River and Silverthorn fishing no indicators. So I know everybody's going to say, oh, Euro nymphing, you're Euro nymphing. Well, no, I'm still fishing fly line, not fishing a mono rig. It's more of like tight line nymphing. guys used to swing soft hackles and stuff. So yeah, I've had a lot of luck just kind of tight line nymphing like that, and just keeping your 9-foot leader kind of tight and running it past those fish. And then when you feel that resistance, just kind of setting the hook, and almost in like a fluid motion with employing a new cast, you're almost setting on almost like every drift. Yep. Not to the point of like snagging, right? But almost just lifting the rod tip a little bit at the end of the drift, waiting to see if you get a touch, and then throwing in that recast,
Yeah. No, that's pretty common. And you said you're running a split up above all that?
I do. I normally run like a number 4 or a BB split shot up above that triple Nymph Rig, just to get down through the current a little bit faster. In the blue here in Silverthorne, it's a lot of deep pools with really fast current, even though the flows historically don't get very high. I mean, right now I think it's at like 50 CFS.
Oh yeah.
But it has a lot of grade, a lot of gradient sections, so it still gets a lot of fast current, even when they're not pushing a lot of water out of the dam.
Yeah, that's pretty low volume.
It is, yeah, but those pools are still pretty deep, and it's crazy how fast that water's moving, even though they're only pumping 50 CFS out of there. You throw your Nymph Rig in there and it just goes woo, it's gone all of a sudden. Right. If you don't have any split shots. So
that's right. But it is cool. I like fishing that kind of volume because, like you said, you can really see fish and target them and be very specific and tactical about it.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the Blue River and Silverthorne is, every now and again, we get like an Arctic char that gets pushed out of the reservoir through the bottom of the dam, and then all of a sudden there's this like 22-inch char sitting in the river, and you're like, whoa, I didn't think you'd catch those in Colorado.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Boom. You see that thing from a mile away, you're like, oh yeah, that's what we're getting. Put the Dalai Lama on and call it a day.
Right. The first one I ever hooked, I thought it was a giant brook trout, and I couldn't believe it, and I got it in, and I was like, oh yeah, it's a char. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Beautiful fish too, right?
Yeah. Gorgeous.
Let's do this. Let's take a break. Hear from my sponsors one last time. Then we come back. We'll break down some more rod setups and give these guys some real tips for being successful on the river. Sound good?
Awesome. Sounds good, Christian.
Angler's Coffee. We love fueling your next cast. We've been roasting coffee before coffee was cool. www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupa Fish. Coming soon. Pre-register now and get notified. www.dupafish, that's DUPE, fish.com. All right, everyone, welcome back. We've got Colten Mclaren on. Colton, when we took the break, we were talking about maybe getting some details on some of the other fishing tactics and techniques that you're using, and I think we've got something in store for the team here that's going to really help them out. So fire away. You were talking about a specific area that can be a little bit intimidating to catch fish in.
Yeah, I wanted to touch base kind of on fishing some of these big freestones, mostly the Colorado River. We have this really good section, Pump House section, which is pretty popular. A lot of people think when they think of the Colorado River, they think big freestone river, not very good for wade fishing. I'm going to need to book a trip with a guide on a float, on a drift boat or a raft or something and go float it. But it can actually be a really, really great wade fishery. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of my tactics for wade fishing the Colorado over there, where, you walk down to the river and you see this big, expansive freestone river and you're like, oh man, how am I going to catch fish here? Like it's too big. And so I just want to talk a little bit about, what I do and to be successful and kind of share it with the folks. So my favorite is, of course, like I talked about, triple Nymph Rig there and dry dropper. But the biggest thing fishing a big freestone river like that is you got to find some slack water. You got to find some less turbulent water, right? You can't just go fish the white water. So when I walk down to a river like the Colorado, I'm looking for braids, side channels, that kind of stuff. That's a couple pieces of the river that's disconnected from the main stem, just to slow it down a little bit, just to give you a little bit more of an approachable piece of water there, and then a big thing in a freestone river is wading. It can be really dangerous wading a river like that. So a lot of times, I'm only 28 years old, but I still carry a wading staff with me every now and again. They're not just for old geezers. Those things can be really, really useful for anybody of any age and any physical kind of stature. So, a wading staff and maybe like cleats on your boots, I would say, are a big thing. But also just finding where those fish are congregated. In the height of summer, when we have those high flows of like 2,000, 3,000 CFS, those fish, trout are kind of lazy. They're not, they're natural conservationists. They're not going to be sitting in the whitewater where they have to be wasting energy all the time. Those fish are going to be sitting on the edges, So I'd say a really big piece of advice for most people is don't just step into the river and start fishing the middle of the river that looks like the juice right away. Fish the edges, kind of work your way from the edge out, because 9 times out of 10, we catch a ton of fish in those first 3 feet right off the bank. Especially, with dry dropper and stuff, those fish are sitting, those brown trout are tucked up in those undercut banks, Another thing I would say is don't rig before you get to the river. I know with the rod vault craze and all these new gadgets that we have that make it so convenient to just step out of the car and already be ready to fish. I kind of hate that, to be honest. I really of course I'll have a rod lined up and I'll have it rigged up with something, but I'm not fishing the bugs that I think are going to catch the most fish until I get down to the river and see what's hatching. A freestone can be so variable. You can have BWOs one day, you can have betases coming off a different day. You could have nothing coming off one day and just be fishing tiny little midge larvae, So a big piece of advice I could give people is don't be ready to fish before you see the river, I would definitely take
cast is it, it's that first.
Right. Exactly. You want to take into account the conditions of the river, what's happening that day. Freestones can be so different day to day. So I think that's a really big one for most people and that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I made as a kid growing up fishing the Colorado is I would just have, bugs that I thought were going to work no matter what. And, you'd go through kind of a slump and then spend a couple hours figuring it out. And then you look under a rock and you say, oh man, there's tons of stoneflies. Maybe I should be fishing a stonefly.
Right. That is funny. You get into that rhythm of like, oh yeah, this is what I fish here all the time. And, a lot of times those first maybe, 2 or 3 casts, that could be the difference between an average fish and like your epic fish of the day because, you really laid it up right. Everything was just right. And you didn't spook them
exactly.
out, so.
Yeah. And also landing a fish in a big freestone like that, if you have a big river, you need to have a plan of what you're going to do after you hook this fish. Because if that fish decides to take you into that fast rapid or that fast current, you're either chasing them there or you're losing that fish.
Yeah, you can't just run after them sometimes,
Yeah. And if you do, a lot of times you're ending up filling your waders. So it's probably not the smartest thing.
Yeah. So what do you look for there? Do you just look for, describe that scenario.
So for me, I'm always, maybe not always, I probably shouldn't say always, but I like to try and have a plan of action for after I hook a fish. So I like to start fishing in a spot that has some slack water nearby. So that way I can give them some side pressure to the left or give them some side pressure to the right and kind of work that fish over into the slack pocket to where I'll be able to net them. I'd like to say I do that all the time, but every now and again, I'm still a little bit foolhardy and you see that big brown rise and you want to go after him anyway, even if he's sitting in behind a boulder that's surrounded by white water, But but yeah, I like to have sort of a plan of action, an end game. You want to have some slack water nearby, or, maybe like a big log or a big boulder or something that's creating that slack water that you're going to be able to get that fish to and then net him. Because as we all know, a fish, and especially a wild trout, goes out into fast water, and there's not a lot you can do to get them back.
Yeah, it's hard to keep them under control, and I do like that. You got to have a plan of action, and it doesn't have to be much. Like you said, it could be a little bit of slack water on the edge, etc. But just knowing, like, hey, look, if I do hook up, like this is what I want to do. So you're not trying to figure it out. So.
Yeah, and maybe even have like an alternative, say, hey, maybe if I let this fish run a little bit more downstream, I can go ahead and get him into this other slack pool, or like down below a cascading kind of rapid or something. You can get them below those boulders and into that slack water.
Yeah,
and kind of get them into an eddy.
Yeah, we often look for the obstacles, right? Like, oh, don't let them get into that grass, don't let them get into that log or tree or whatever. But taking the other perspective of where do I want to get them, and then steering them that way when you can. Well, Colton,
go ahead, fire away. I think one more important thing I want to talk about is you're gonna lose fish. That's part of fishing, and that's what makes it cool. When you land that big 18-inch brown or whatever, or 18-inch rainbow or whatever species it is, it's important for people not to get discouraged. I think, for me early on, fishing, when I would lose a fish, it was a big deal, and it took me a long time to get over that, and just keep moving on to the next fish. You're going to lose fish. That's how it goes. That's fishing. If that didn't happen, we'd call it catching, and it would be boring.
That's right. Yeah. Well, Colton, it was great getting to know you a little more this week and hearing about the fisheries in and around your area. I appreciate you sharing all the information, and let's definitely try and get together. I got a dog whining for her breakfast. It's still early, and I hope you have a great day, my man.
Hey, you too, Christian. It was great to meet you. And if you're ever out here, give me a call, and we'll go chase some trout. Maybe we'll get you in the drift boat.
You got it. Sounds like a plan, my man.
Yeah, definitely. If your listeners want to get a hold of me, you can always check out Colten Mclaren Fly Fishing on Instagram. You can always see me on Kirk's Fly Shop Grand Lake, and then Kirk's Fly Shop is our Estes site Instagram. So we have Kirk's Fly Shop Grand Lake, KIRKS, and then me on Colten Mclaren Fly Fishing.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you next week, everyone, and have a great week. We'll see you.
See you.